It is really my perspective that the Bible is really just about two things, salvation and housing. You all are looking at me a little bit perplexed, but it's really about two things. The Bible is from Genesis to Revelations. You only see two recurring themes, salvation and housing. Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden and become the first homeless couple. And then from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you find them going through the wilderness, and they are tabernacling until they can find some sense of housing. We cross over into the New Testament, and we find the very first Airbnb with Mary and Joseph, who are in a manger because there is absolutely no room in any of the inns. We see Jesus, who has gotten his full certification as a carpenter, 30 years of age, and he's living outside of his dad's house. And he makes the testimony after finding a full career with no children, no marriage, only 12 friends. And he says out loud, foxes have holes, birds have nests, and a grown man got nowhere to live. And so it brings us to a real crosshairs of what is the responsibility of the church if we are only talking about salvation and not dealing with housing. Is it a real reflection of the gospel and what it means and where it is that we ought to go? There are some standouts that really should be noted in this room. I preach in a lot of mainline traditional black churches, and for anybody who's in the room who's a member of the Church of God in Christ, they will tell you in order for you to start a church in the Church of God in Christ, you got to get 50 people to sign a sheet of paper, and they send that sheet of paper to Memphis, and Memphis will then send you back your credentials. And if you have those credentials, then officially you can have a church in the Church of God in Christ. To start a Jewish synagogue, you don't need 50, you need 12. And the catch is that those 12 have to have independent wealth. And as a consequence, there is not one Jewish synagogue in America, hear this, not one Jewish synagogue in America that has a mortgage. Because they understand the value of housing a house for God. As a consequence, on the other side of it, those of you who are members of a black church have a building fund that's 25 years old with a picture in the lobby with no plans that go along with it. And so what is that disconnect? Notice then, because I am not a banker, I am not a lender, I am not a realtor, I'm a preacher. And so as a consequence, notice what is the fiscal plan that Jesus modeled for us that so many of our churches and as a consequence church members have missed. I've given to you as the basic integer that to start a synagogue you need 12 people of independent wealth. And as a consequence, when Jesus chooses the 12 disciples, I want you to pay attention to something your pastor never showed you. When Jesus chooses the 12 disciples, not one of the 12 disciples went to seminary. Not one of them went to Bible college. Not one of them, here it is, were ordained. All 12 he chose from business. Because Jesus was of the mind that if you can't do business, then you're not fit for ministry. And as a consequence, he made sure that he had all of the people around him that would safeguard the ministry, that it would be able to survive some 2,023 years later. A lot of churches are failing because we put people in leadership for perfect attendance and not for competence. Just because you can pray don't mean you should be a trustee. There's got to be some litmus test of what is the value of what you bring to the table and how the ministry should go forward. What a lot of churches and a lot of pastors won't tell you, but what is glaring through theology and through history is 3/4 of the disciples. 3/4 of the disciples have more education than Jesus. You got a lawyer, you got a doctor, you got an IRS agent, you've got an accountant, and here it is that you've got a young man who came through Job Corps. Uh, in spite of coming through Job Corps, he says, I want to surround myself with people who are competent in areas where I do not have training. To help me to institute and to undergird what is needed and necessary to fortify a ministry that will be able to outlive my 3-year track. And so what is our responsibility? And when I say our, I am saying collectively. What is our responsibility to engage, to reinvigorate, to enlighten and improve the state of life for those who are in the church, and as a consequence, those that are in the community? I want you to have as an asterisk while you are gathering that black home ownership in 1968 is larger than what it is in 2023. Let me give that to you again slower. More black people owned a home when Dr. King was killed than when Obama was president. What does that say to where it is that we are if we're doing the electric slide backwards? It is only black people. Now, I realize I'm in a multicultural setting. I'm going to come get the rest of you. Let me speak to my people for just a minute. It is only black people that are having housewarmings for an apartment. Yeah. Y'all done just blacked out at the table. Just come back. We're going to give you CPR in just one moment. Of how it is that we set up what is the standard that we're seeing Airbnb almost as a grift, that laws have to be put in place for those who are running Airbnb operations from apartments and they don't own any of the property themselves. It's hard for us to do it when the church is not modeling nor using the language of home ownership, but the church is now preaching a Las Vegas gospel that suggests that if you shout, you'll be debt-free. If you give in the $100 offering, you'll be millionaire. But nobody is preaching the value and the virtue of sweat equity, delayed gratification, and understanding what are the principles by which we grow and move in a much greater direction. I want to put myself on the panoply of psychology for an assessment and an evaluation that really latches on to the introduction that I was so graciously given, so that you know my journey and how it is that I end up on this stage today. I was pastoring in Baltimore up until 4 years ago, and was doing quite well. We had a sanctuary holds 2,500 people. I was doing 3 services on Sunday morning. Police was outside directing traffic because of the throngs of young people and young adults and first-time believers who were joining the church. 4 years ago, I got a call to move here to Atlanta, and I took over the church that was previously pastored by the late Bishop Eddie Long. And it's one of the largest churches, black churches in America. It has, Marcia, the largest land-owning black church in America, sitting on almost 350 continuous acres. I was excited. I started December 8th, 2018. December 8th, 2018 was my first day on the job here in Atlanta. December 11th was my first finance meeting with the church. Yeah, it's only black people laughing because y'all already know where it's going from here. So I get in our first finance meeting, and they announced to me after my first Sunday as pastor, so you have context, after I have resigned from the church in Baltimore, after Marcia's friend sells my house in Baltimore. After all of that, they then tell me that I've got $32 million in debt. And not just $32 million in debt, but I am 4 months from foreclosure. And I go into... Yeah, I'm in a nervous breakdown that's getting ready to happen. I mean, I trust God and all, but this is this is asking for a bit much. And in my mind, I'm working through the worst case scenario that if this church forecloses, they're gonna say Jamal did it. Yeah, that it happened on my watch, and all the more to add insult to injury, the church members didn't know we was headed to foreclosure. I'm gonna let y'all seep all of that in. And so I'm the new pastor here, having been here for a sum total of 5 days, and I got to have a church meeting. And I've never been Baptist before. So I got to have a church meeting to tell them what is the state of affairs. And Atlanta that night turned into Soweto. I mean, it was just an uprising. Give us free. I mean, I was going down with the ship. And I really had to sit down and really think through and process through a different lens on what economic development looked like. Because 32 million was not going to come from the plate. Yeah. I wasn't pastoring in Buckhead. Yeah, Stonecrest is a fancy word for Decatur. Yeah, so I'm in Decatur. I'm not sure if it's greater, but I'm in Decatur with $32 million worth of debt. And I had to dream different, had to think different, had to process different. And the Lord really came to me and said, how were you sitting on 350 acres, watch this, with a church and a gym? You're sitting on 350 contiguous acres, a church and a gym. How were you modeling economic development? How are you modeling what the community is supposed to look like? Because the message you are giving to the community is that your job is to shout and to play. Nothing about work, nothing about living, nothing about development. And so our churches have got to really re-examine what are we suggesting to the community by our existence. The late Desmond Tutu said that for any church to stay open, the poorest in the community should vote on their relevance. If you can't get the vote from the poor, should that church stay open? John Maxwell asked the question, if your church closes, will it matter to the community outside of parking spaces being made available? What difference are you making? How are you functioning? How are you flowing? How are you moving in a capacity that empowers the community? Because if you're not empowering the community, you are entertaining the community. And so I'm glad that I can stand before you today, and I want to walk you through a couple of things that we are doing that I am praying that churches will begin to emulate and will begin to duplicate. And it comes from trial and error. So I want to first tell you about the failures of division. First failure division that happened, and I got killed in a drive-by shooting called social media. I said, if I'm sitting on 350 acres, why not the church look at going into the cannabis industry? Yeah. All of the people in the hood said, "Hail Caesar." All of the people from the church said, "Give us Barabbas." So the mind frame was, if the prison pipeline is filled with young African American men who have found themselves trafficked in the industry but locked outside of it, then why should not the church be a participator in the legalization of what is taking place where the black community has largely been marginalized and has been excluded? I pastor a multi-generational church. I lovingly tell my church that they are between Motown and Def Jam. They are somewhere in between. And so my Motown generation rose up in the spirit of the dock in Montgomery and was looking for folding chairs to get me out of there, that this was not going to work out for where it is that we were going. And I went to Detroit maybe 2 years. All right, Detroit. All right, Detroit. I went to Detroit, and something dawned on me, and I came back with a vision, and we just received our permit 2 months ago that we are going to begin construction in February on 150 mini houses. 150 mini houses. But I want you to hear the catch. 150 mini houses that I am only selling to millennial couples. I'm only selling to millennial couples to reintroduce to our community what does a starter house look like. Because people get lost on Zillow. Y'all ain't saying your first house ain't gonna have a pool, it ain't gonna have a deck, it ain't gonna have a patio, but this is what a starter house looks like. From a business vantage point, I knew that it would be able to continuously bring money to the church, because if I put boomers in the mini houses, then they're going to paint the shutters and plant a garden and just be there. But I knew the millennials, once they start having kids, that I can escort them right on out. And then the next group is getting ready to come right back in. And so that then begins a level of understanding. How do we get to a place of obtainable wealth? How do we get to a place where we have a stock in it? Atlanta, for those of you who have not noticed or tracked, Atlanta has had this year over 57,000 evictions. Did y'all hear what I just said? 57,000 evictions in Atlanta. We lead from example. Moses gave the leadership lesson of you walk with the people, you walk in front of the people, and then you walk above the people. And many of our leadership disconnect is that we've never walked with the people. As a pastor, you can't have more armor bearers than you have members. You have to have the common touch while still walking with kings. And so I made the pronouncement that while we were building 150, there'll be 151 on the property because I'm going to move into one of those mini houses as a model that this is not a outreach initiative. Yeah. Because a lot of times when we do business, we do a business as if it is a mission or it's overseas, but that these are, in fact, real live houses that you can live in, that you can be a part of, and you can be proud of. Our second phase of our housing development that really has our church community and the larger community excited is that we're building one of the first of its kind in its nation that I'm almost ashamed that we are being a trailblazer for. One of the first of kind in the nation. It is senior housing. Here's the catch. Senior housing for seniors who have custody of their grandchildren. So it makes it a community. So if you can imagine, if you can see it from 50,000 feet in the air, that on one side of the campus I have millennials, young families that are coming, and then on the other side of the campus I have a senior community that is raising up children that helps us to see what does the real community look like, how do we thrive, how do we function, how do we navigate and mobilize. In that will be vendors and stores of how it is that we move and how it is that we function. Over the pandemic, for those of you who are not familiar with our ministry, over the pandemic we opened something called the King's Table. We opened it 1 month before Dr. Fauci's first press conference. And a little old lady from our church, her name is Sister Flossie, came to me and said, Pastor, I want to open up a soup kitchen at the church. And I got to tell y'all, I wasn't excited about no soup kitchen. I had never done one in my ministry in Baltimore. And my mind frame about a soup kitchen is just old cans of Campbell's soup, some Jell-O, some ramen noodles, and nobody is coming. Uh, we opened it up 1 month before the pandemic hit. In our first month, we had 250 people come for the month. Then the pandemic hit, and it went to 500. Then the next week, we were doing around 600 cars a week. Then 700. Then 900. The Atlanta Food Bank went empty. Listen to me. Atlanta Food Bank went empty. Red Cross was barren. And people just started being directed to New Birth. Over the course of the pandemic, it was our responsibility and our cross that within a 2-year period of time, we served over 1 million families groceries. Over 1 million families. Why am I telling you that? Our church during the pandemic, like most of you all's, was virtual. And our church began to grow exponentially. And so the black farmers of Georgia started coming to our church on Thursday because they had excess crops, because restaurants were by and large closed, and they would bring their bumper crops up to our church. Trader Joe's started coming to our church. Costco started coming to our church. People like Steve Harvey and his foundation started writing checks to our church. And our church had an explosive growth in the pandemic. And here's what I need you to pay attention to, is that they were not joining because of how the choir sang. They were not joining our church because of how I preached. People were joining the church because of service. And they said, if you are serving like that, then we can get in alignment with that. Ladies and gentlemen, already this year, over 3,150 people have joined our church already this year, and here we are in September. And I wish I could tell you that it's because of the choir. God knows I wish I could tell you it's because of me. But because people are watching to see will your actions speak louder than your words, how it is that you move and how it is that you function. I had to do that. Why? Because how can I justify raising a capital for a $32 million mortgage? Listen to me. How could I justify as pastor to save God's house if I wasn't putting people in their own? That there had to be some level, those of you old enough for the Reagan era, of trickle-down economics. Of understanding that the oil starts at the head and then begins to flow down to the skirts of the robe. Ladies and gentlemen, what now has happened is that there is a level of buoyancy, expectancy, and enthusiasm within our church of what you can do when home ownership becomes an option and it becomes available. What I am getting ready to say to you is going to be unnerving and almost dizzying, but I will go out on a limb and say to you that most of our churches are not teaching financial literacy or home development or home ownership. Wait, don't clap yet, because here's where I drop napalm, because the pastor is financially illiterate. And so before it is that you go to the congregants, you're going to have to educate the pastors on why it is that they need this information and this education. A lot of our pastors, both black and white, are not retiring, not because they still got the fire of God, but because there is no retirement put in place. And so as a consequence, they find themselves losing and coming behind because they have not become educated themselves. I was mentored by an old Jewish rabbi that really changed my thought process and changed my mind, and I hope it will equip and empower you on why it is and how it is that I was doing church wrong, doing pastoring wrong, and how it is that I was preaching wrong. And that is that 99% of you that go to church are a part of a church that teaches tithing. 99% of you who go to a church that teaches tithing, but nobody has ever given me the understanding that tithing is reflective of a budget. I cannot ask people for 10% if I did not tell them how to multiply the 90. And all of our focus has been on that 10% without showing people what do you do with the 90. Here it is, when 92% of black people, I need you to have this, 92% of black people don't have a singular piece of stock. So if they do not have a singular piece of stock, how am I telling them how to invest in the kingdom? So we've got to recalibrate what is our thinking of understanding. I have no biblical record of how it is that clapping will pay bills. No biblical record of it. But how it is that we work, how it is that we function, how it is that we move. How when Jesus called the 12 disciples, it was a caste system. And so Luke, who was a doctor, his dad was a doctor. How the person who was an accountant, his father was an accountant. So in Jesus' hour, there was no such thing as a career fair. You followed in the footsteps of those who went before you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having the arduous, daunting task of teaching financial literacy to those who are following the footsteps of those who had on flip-flops. I say to the members of my church, never go to a church where you can tell which car is the pastor's. Listen to me. Never go to a church where you can tell which car is the pastor's. When the Roman soldiers came to arrest Jesus, they had to ask which one is he. Hear this, because all 12 had on linen robes. You have to raise up the people so that they live at your standard of living. And when they live at your standard of living, there is no sidewalk chatter about where the pastor lives. Most of you who are at that table, 9 out of 10 of you who are at the table, never give a thought about what kind of car your doctor drives. You never think twice about where your dentist lives. Why? Because you know the help, you know the worth, you know the value. It is only in the authenticity and the credibility of your spiritual leader that it comes into question why they got that on. Because they never showed you how it is that you can have the exact same thing. And so the death trap of the black community, of the minority community, is a wretched curse called a prosperity doctrine. And the prosperity doctrine is robbing us of the sensibility of what it means to have savings and not just checking. It's the prosperity doctrine that robs us of understanding of what is a long-term investment. It's a prosperity doctrine that robs us of understanding that the gospel is true. It is only if you suffer with him that you can reign with him. And so let us do an amazing job of empowering and equipping the community using the biblical model that Jesus afforded to all of us in understanding that housing is what it is that God has blessed all of his children with. We just got to figure out how it is that we do it. How do we navigate around it? And we do it with integrity, do it with decency, and we do it with compassion. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you all today.